The phone rang persistently, pulling me out of the sweet embrace of sleep. I got up, sat on the bed, and looked at the ringing device, hoping it was just a wrong number, but the call didn't stop. Finally, mustering courage, I picked up the receiver, ready to listen to the caller. "This is Dima, the manager of the Bronze Age Club where I worked on weekends." A voice from the other end of the line informed me, "Hello, there's some comedian looking for you, insisting that you perform at his anniversary. He says he'll pay good money. They'll be celebrating out of town at the Old Castle Motel in the evening. How about this idea? My wife went to her parents, and my daughter is staying with mine, so why not? What time?" I replied, "At 7 in the evening." Dima answered, "Okay, I'll be there." I concluded the conversation. Hanging up the phone, then I turned on the record player, put on a vinyl, and poured myself some whiskey, but suddenly there were knocks on the door. I approached and looked through the peephole. A messenger in uniform stood there with an envelope in his hands. I opened the door, and he silently handed me the envelope before leaving. I returned to the kitchen, opened the envelope, and found a card and a few dollars, a deposit for the performance. Then I went back to the room, changed the record, and settled into the chair, savoring the moment, reflecting on my life with my wife Svetlana. We met at someone's anniversary when I was under 30. At that time, I played with the guys, providing musical accompaniment, and Svetlana stood out among the guests. We danced, and after the anniversary, I gave her a ride home. That's how our story began, which lasted for almost 15 years. Svetlana and I, after careful consideration of the situation, decided that it would be best to get married. Our wedding took place in September, although we didn't have a luxurious celebration. We were happy to have friends, parents, and close relatives around. 3 years after the wedding, our daughter joined us. While working as an engineer at the factory, I found solace on weekend evenings in the cozy little club Bronze Age, where Soviet rock and roll from the 70s was played. In my youth, I managed to study not only at the Engineering Institute but also to complete a music school. Music has always been my stronghold, helping me overcome difficulties. Gathering a small team, we started performing covers of forgotten bands, and discovered that there were many fans of this music in our city. Svetlana engaged in landscape design and created projects for affluent clients. Over time, she became in demand in this field, leading to increased business trips. However, I always believed in my wife, and we achieved a decent standard of living, allowing us to enjoy both the everyday and entertainment. Unexpectedly for me, I learned that the owners of the Bronze Age Club were planning to leave the country and urgently selling the club at a fairly advantageous price. Without much hesitation and borrowing money from my parents, I took out a loan from the bank, added all my savings, and bought the club, registering the deal under my father's name, who enjoyed tax benefits. It was my decision, and Svetlana was unaware of it. Deciding to wait for her return, I chose to celebrate our new acquisition and discuss the next steps. Should I leave my job at the factory and dedicate myself entirely to the club, or should I continue balancing between the two spheres? After lunch, I contacted the guys, asking them to come to the motel earlier to set up the equipment. Trying to reach Svetlana but facing her switched-off phone, I decided to call back later, assuming it had run out of battery. Changing into appropriate attire and taking necessary items, I headed to the motel. The parking lot was filled with expensive cars, and, grabbing my instrument and bag, I headed towards the entrance. The concierge greeted me, informing that the anniversary celebrant had inquired about my arrival multiple times. Going up on stage, I ensured everything was ready, and we were prepared to start the performance. The host in a fashionable suit approached me, and we began our show titled Ricochet. Thus began our new chapter in the history of the Bronze Age Club. So, Events were unfolding rapidly. At Pavel Yurievich's anniversary, music filled the hall, and the Jubilee invited me, as a musician, to join the celebration. I was surprised, as I did not expect to see my wife here. Pavel shared that they had been together for a year and proposed marriage to her. The spectacle was beautiful, but for me, it became an unexpected and somewhat shocking moment. My hands, as if by magic, started playing music, and I took on the lead for the song Autumn in honor of the jubilarian. At that moment, Svetlana entered the hall, led by Pavel. When she looked up, I saw her astonishment and confusion. I felt mixed emotions, watching her react to what was happening. The Jubilee announced his proposal and gifted Svetlana a beautiful diamond ring. Guests applauded, and Svetlana took it in her hand, but her gaze was filled with questions. I continued to perform songs, trying to hide my emotions and contemplating the steps to be taken. Inside me, feelings were in conflict. Understanding that causing a scene at the celebration was not worth it, I decided to endure the show until the end. I felt like the spectator of my own surrealistic drama. However, watching Svetlana, I also realized that inevitably I would have to talk to her after the performance. Eventually, when I finished my performance, the silence in the hall was broken by applause, and I felt relief. However, knowing that I couldn't avoid a conversation, I went up on stage. The jubilarian thanked us and introduced our band Ricochet. I looked at Svetlana, and our eyes met. It was evident that a conversation was inevitable, and it would be a challenging discussion about what was happening in her life and mine. The situation at the anniversary was a shock for me. When I discovered that my wife, Svetlana, was seeing another man, he was clearly her companion, sticking close to her every step of the way. After our performance, amidst applause and packing up the equipment, the host handed me an envelope with money and informed me that Pavel Yurayevich was pleased and would contact me. Well, that's unlikely, I thought, slinging the guitar over my shoulder and approaching Svetlana. She was sitting alone. Her companion was absent. Seeing me, she lowered her gaze. "They asked you to pass this along," I said, tossing my wedding ring into her champagne-filled glass. Then walked out, grabbed my bag, and headed towards the car. During the ride home, the car's engine purred like a hungry cat with sour cream, while inside me, a cold emptiness filled the bubbling emotions. The question, "How could she?" haunted me. Upon arriving home, I faced a call from Dima, a friend who suggested discussing what was happening and figuring out how to move forward. The next morning, deciding to meet Dima, I pondered where I had gone wrong in the relationship. Despite our financial difficulties, I tried to provide Svetlana with everything she needed. We remembered how Svetlana persuaded me to have a second child, only to find out that she was involved with another man. Dima's phone call interrupted my thoughts. "Dima," my wife's voice brought me back to reality. "Are you home?" I decided to remain silent. "Hello, Dima. We need to talk." "Can I come over in the morning?" I suggested, but Svetlana had already started shouting. I turned off the phone and immersed myself in contemplation of how all this had happened and why. Frankly, I didn't understand what she lacked, as there was no denial of anything. We lived quite comfortably despite limited resources. At that moment, I had a severe headache, and my heart stopped pounding. It simply thundered, occasionally sinking somewhere down. Thoughts of calling my daughter flashed in my mind, but I realized it was not the best moment. Time was passing, getting late. I decided not to disturb the child, and we would wait until morning. That night, I practically didn't sleep. My heart was boiling, moving either into my throat or stomach. The thought of calling for an ambulance crossed my mind, deciding that I could endure it. In the morning, round 9 o'clock, I heard the click of the front door, realizing that my wife had arrived. I understand that the whole situation has turned out meanly, but I genuinely fell in love. My still wife began her monologue, and the feeling that took over me turned out to be stronger. I listened to her silently, staring out the window where snow was falling slowly, a quite characteristic phenomenon. For the beginning of March, I stood up, closed the window. The moment of our shared future disappeared for me. I couldn't see us together. At some point, I realized that Svetlana had become alien and unpleasant to me. Living with a woman who had changed and betrayed was almost as repulsive as licking an ashtray with other people's cigarette butts. Although you've done a lot for me and our family, I appreciate it, but I can't do anything about myself, Svetlana continued her monologue. The impression was as if she had memorized these cliched phrases in advance. Sveta, there's no need to waste time in vain. I've understood everything about love and that it's stronger than you. I interrupted her outpouring. I had a question. What would happen to Zhenya? Will you take her to a new dad? Svetlana fell silent and then looked at me plaintively. I would like Zhenya to stay with me. We plan to go to Italy with Pasha. He has a villa there and she has school, friends here. I wouldn't want to uproot her. Let her finish her studies. Svetlana lowered her eyes, avoiding eye contact. The divorce happened promptly, without unnecessary questions. As I was leaving the courthouse and saw my ex-wife kissing her Pasha and getting into the car, a thought crossed my mind that at that moment I was losing a piece of my soul. It was sad. Zhenya, without displaying much emotion, calmly accepted her mother leaving for another man. I expected hysteria, tears, or some complaints. But she just looked at me, with tears in her eyes, and said, Dad, I only ask one thing. Let's remember this for a lifetime. Let's never forgive her. That same evening, my daughter gathered all the family photos with Svetlana and threw them into the trash chute. 2 years later, I decided on a radical step. I quit my job to fully dedicate myself to the club. My concept with vintage Soviet rock and roll proved itself within 6 months, and the club began to generate decent income. I invited Natasha, a charming woman just over 30 with a business-minded attitude, to be the administrator. We started inviting well-known rock bands from the past. But a difficulty arose. Our hall was too small for all the interested people. The decision came unexpectedly to buy the entire building where the club was located. Taking a loan from the bank and investing the funds accumulated over 6 months, I realized my plan. My collection of vintage guitars appeared in the club, creating a suitable atmosphere. I planned to have an office and a 1-bedroom apartment for myself on the 2nd floor, and I decided to give my daughter my current apartment. Everything started falling into place. 3 months later, the renovated Bronze Age Club opened its doors to fans of Soviet vintage rock and roll. Gradually, the pain of my wife's betrayal began to fade, and there came a moment when I stopped thinking about Svetlana, where she was, and what happened to her no longer concerned me. I tried to find pleasure in small things in childhood. My mother insured me for 500 rubles until adulthood, when it was time to get the insurance. My mother said I could buy whatever I wanted at that moment. My cherished dream was to play in an ensemble. Unfortunately, I didn't have an instrument, and no one was particularly interested in taking a guitarist without a guitar. Of course, I dreamed of a guitar with my mother. We went to the department store, and there I bought an electric guitar from the Borisov factory. That's how my musical career began. Later, I had other instruments, but I attached special importance to my first guitar. Unfortunately, it disappeared over time, and I fruitlessly searched my parents' apartment for it. One day, my father called and said there was an old guitar in the garage. What should he do with it? In half an hour, I was already at his place, and there it was, my first guitar, my mother's. I returned to the club, connected it to the amplifier, and it sounded again. According to the proverb, one can also fulfill a cherished dream. I placed my first guitar in the office to constantly remind me of the beginning of my musical career and youth. Summer came unnoticed. Zhenya went to a youth camp for 2 weeks, and then we decided to go to the sea. My daughter turned into an attractive young lady, and many people turned their heads when we walked around the city. As a father, of course, it brought me pleasure. However, deep down, I felt jealousy. Natural laws are unforgiving. While Zhenya was away, I moved to the club and enjoyed my new residence. Things were going well. Natasha, the administrator, was doing an excellent job. However, I noticed a change in her attitude toward me. She developed a serious interest in my personality, evident in various aspects. Firstly, she befriended Zhenya, and my daughter started appearing in the club more often, interacting with Natasha. In the mornings, we enjoyed natural coffee with homemade pastries. And later, I found out that Natasha had bought a coffee machine with her own money. Homemade cutlets appeared in my diet, and I mistakenly believed that no one but my mother knew how to cook cutlets. The cutlets Natasha treated me to became a real culinary masterpiece. Time passed, but the traditions of winning men remained unchanged. The way to their hearts is through the stomach, and Natasha skillfully used this timeless female trick. She didn't rush, didn't impose her company or conversations. But I felt more and more drawn into the quagmire created by Natasha one warm summer evening. I lingered in my office. There was no need to hurry, as the apartment was just a few meters away. I was planning to savor the important moment for any man, pouring half a glass of amber drink, and suddenly remembered Svetlana. Just thought about her. Her current life held no interest for me. The thought passed, and I instantly forgot it. Before I could enjoy the whiskey, my mobile phone rang persistently. I'll be honest, I felt the desire to throw it against the wall, but I restrained myself and answered the call. Hello. There was silence on the other end, but I could hear breathing. Hello, speak. Dima, a familiar female voice. Svetlana, I'm listening. Go on. Dima, don't hang up. I urgently need to meet you. I can come over. Svetlana's voice sounded softly, pleading, right now. Okay, come. I'm in the club. The main thing is no emotions. I hung up. My ex-wife stood before me in all her splendor. A restrained but extremely expensive red dress, stockings, high-heeled shoes, half-face misted glasses, and this stunning outfit was completed by a hat. Svetlana turned out to be a model, as if from the pages of a glossy magazine, but something on her face didn't speak of happiness. She sat across from me, lowering her head, expressing humility and submission with her entire appearance. Dima, I understand, such things are unforgivable. But I'm begging you, not a single day passes without me thinking about you. Svetlana's eyes filled with tears. I did something terrible. I betrayed you, our marriage, our daughter. She told me that the whirlwind of passion in her life was only momentary. Pusha, her husband, succumbing to temptation, found a new object of attraction significantly younger than Svetlana. For a while, Pasha literally lived between two families, after which he suggested that Svetlana vacate their shared living space. It was evident that he generously supported his ex-girlfriend financially. But Svetlana's joy from this was only temporary. A new admirer appeared in her life, an Italian, the owner of a gas station. Perhaps it wasn't as glamorous, but in the absence of other options, passion flared up according to the principle of any port in a storm. Svetlana was convinced that this mad romance would last forever. And indeed, it lasted a whole month until Svetlana's finances ran out. However, her mood wasn't spoiled because even the gas station brought in a decent income. But here's the trouble. The Italian was not inclined to support the Russian beauty at his own expense, apparently. These foreigners were extremely stingy. Once again, Svetlana was asked to vacate the apartment, and at that moment, Svetlana remembered that she had a husband and a daughter, not strangers at all. With difficulty, she scraped together enough money for a ticket, and arrived here with the intention of reuniting with her family. She continued to speak, and I silently watched the woman I once loved. Without hesitation, she cynically betrayed me, lied for a whole year, living a double life with her lover, and suddenly, She erased me and Genya from her everyday reality, leaving for another man. Now she has reappeared and wants to come back to me. She apologized, and her lips covered with bright lipstick. Uttered these words as if sweet confessions, but in my perception, they sounded like a blow. Does she really think I'll believe her deceitful stories? Genya's words came to mind as a reminder. Dad, I ask you, let's remember this forever. Never forgive her. I interrupted Svetlana's heart-wrenching monologue, pausing the conversation. I told her goodbye and pointed out that there's no place for her in my life. She left, pressing a handkerchief to her eyes, and in my office lingered the scent of her perfume. I finished my whiskey, put on my jacket, and headed to the door. It was time to open the club, the time for rock and roll.